For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on StratNewsGlobal. Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal. I'm Surya Gangadharan. The Ukraine conflict could have a fallout, a very damaging fallout, on a completely different dimension, that of international cooperation in space. So let me give you these details that I have in a graphic. There's space cooperation is at risk because of this conflict. The US has already imposed sanctions on Russia's space program. Russia's Roscosmos has ceased all cooperation with the European Space Agency. The Russia-European collaboration on an ExoMars mission is now suspended. A Russia-NASA mission to Venus called Venera D is now off the table. There are also issues of the launch of OneWeb satellites. These could be in jeopardy. So that in a nutshell gives you the kind of issues we're going to face going forward if this conflict prolongs. So let me bring in my guest for this evening, Chaitanya Giri. You've met him on our channel before. He's a specialist on space, and he's also a consultant to government on technology, innovation, and so on. Chaitanya, welcome. Glad to have you again.
Thank you, Suryaji.
So let me come to my first question. The Ukraine crisis, how is it going to affect cooperation between Russia and the West? And where could either side lose out?
Yeah, there are tremendous losses. The marriage between Russia and the West was of timely consequence and convenience, largely emerging after the fall of the Soviet Union. That time has passed by, and what we see right now is a nasty divorce happening, and both of them rekindling new partnerships with gusto and passion. Now, such divorces and finding new partnerships are extremely demanding. The broad point that I'm wanting to make here is that the world is staring at the creation of two new astropolitical blocs. Blocs that will extend their geopolitical affinities and rivalries in outer space in an uninhibited manner. This rearrangement and severing of ties that we are looking at will force them to rear new partnerships, train the new systems for interoperability. They'll start finding new industrial supply chains. They'll start creating new innovation ecosystems and try to find a common goal for themselves. The graphic and the list of missions that are suspended that you've just shown shows the extent of damage that this Ukraine crisis is creating for the cooperation that has existed between Russia and the West. Commitments are being abandoned, investments are written off as losses, and this will have tremendous impact on the global space sector. Let me go back into the history. At the fag end of the race to the moon between between Soviet Union and United States, and when Apollo succeeded finally in landing on the moon, the two groups came together and they came up with an idea of using space cooperation as a detente mechanism and as a warming agent to thaw the Cold War. Much recently, even after the disintegration of Soviet Union, the new Russian state entered into an agreement with a select group of NATO countries and non-NATO allies to form what we see as the International Space Station. Now, over the years, ISS has been an epitome of Russian and Western cooperation in space, where we found the United States taking charge of life support, taking charge of initiating the ISS, bringing in partners like Canada, France, a host of other partners from the European Space Agency, Japan, South Korea. So they all participated in there. Russians were largely responsible for carrying expeditions or crewed expeditions, carrying humans to the ISS, logistics, and they especially took the mantle of supplying logistics to the ISS and astronauts after the retirement of the space shuttle in 2011. So for around 10 years, between 2011 and 2020, it was only Russia that was carrying astronauts and logistics to the ISS. There was no contribution coming from the US because they were still finding an alternative. The alternative came by in 2020 in the form of SpaceX when it entirely on its own was able to take a crew of around a few astronauts to the ISS, and voila, US was back in charge of the mechanism to give access to outer space. Now, today the US has created alternatives that it was missing for almost a decade. Russians, all this while, were contemplating to sever ties in the past 1 decade, but they couldn't do so. And there were plans of Russia having its own space station. Now, since weak economy does not favor Russians to create a bloc of its own, they are now wanting to join hands with the Chinese. Likewise, the US is also intending, or it has already begun to bring under its umbrella a band of countries with whom they can share financial, technological, and human resources to set up their own space station and to have their own set of ambitions. So, all in all, we are seeing a major rearrangement on the astropolitical chessboard.
Chaitanya, it seems that the US and the Russia are going back to that 50s and 60s when there was Cold War and intense rivalry, competition in space. Is that the scenario you're outlining?
Yeah, see, I don't intend to be a fearmongerer here, or as we say in Sanskrit, Vigna Santoshi person. I'm not expecting rivalries, but this time the competition, the contest will be intense because it's not just a bipolar world order anymore. We are staring at a global multipolarity. Now, back then, the US was able to hands down outdo the Soviet Union by, in terms of innovation, financing, and ecosystem building with the private sector. The Soviets failed at all these aspects.
Yeah.
And since the breakup, US remained the sole space superpower for good 20, 25 years now. And even today, we see it is far ahead of the next three, which are Europe, Russia, and China. Now, the Chinese space capabilities during the same period when US enjoyed the unipolarity have also increased tremendously. And thanks to the fact that China did not distinguish between its civilian and military ambitions, they were all coming together. They were gelling well. And uh, today, China's military space program is actually the forerunner of its commercial and civilian ambitions as well. And it derives the best of both the worlds. It takes the best from the Soviet model, it takes the best from the American model, and it has come up as a deadly hybrid. We've seen in the past 5, 6 years, especially just before the onset of BRI, that China began surreptitiously acquiring very vulnerable and sick space and aerospace companies, especially those that can be qualified as startups or MSMEs. They have acquired them from West, all the sick companies, to fill in the technology gaps within the Chinese ecosystem. And by doing so, China is now aiming to target USS Achilles' heels, which is its space program. And the Ukraine conflict may as well bring China closer to an aggravated partner, Russia. Now, these two astropolitical blocs, they will not only posture uh, in terms of politics and technopolitics, but they'll also start canceling each other. And the list that you mentioned, it's cancellation. They may also create their own interoperable and competing technology standards, a separate financing system of their own, separate innovation ecosystems infested with sharks and vultures. So they will have entities that will go out and hunt for startups in the West. The Western sharks will come into China and look for something that is really that they are looking at. So stark ideological differences may emerge, and consensus on the current space treaties and agreements they are likely to fall out. And anyways, with the coming in of Industry 4.0, many of the space treaties, which were formed back in the 60s and 70s, they're now fast getting outdated. And about the private sector that you mentioned, see, they are likely to toe the line of their biggest client, the client that gives them business sustainability. So, and I won't name anyone, but some of them have grown extremely big and influential. And as we call them big tech, and they'll carve their own strategy and diplomacies. And as we've seen, there is a friction between Silicon Valley and Pentagon. And that also shows that strategy of any big tech need not necessarily align with the country of their residence.
Yeah. Bizarre world we're heading into. So from what you're telling me, China could be the main gainer here, really.
Yeah, to an extent it will gain. I mean, one major gain for China in all this is Russia. It will get closer to Russia. And China may see Russia as a new source of raw materials, especially critical metals, minerals, materials. Then Russia is a treasure trove of space-proven technologies.
Yeah.
And China will see Russia as a co-developer of technologies, and a co-developer that has a fire in its belly. Now, having a normal co-developer and somebody with a fire in the belly is two different things. So there is a chance that that will happen. But on the downside of the Russian-Chinese partnership, a lot of sick companies in Russia might get acquired by the Chinese. And I'm not assuming that
allow this.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming. I'm not assuming that the Russian-Chinese partnership will be hunky-dory. Russia will be very careful to not let China take up many of these companies and not extend its sphere of influence in the CSTO, in the CSTO alliance. So it would want to have its autonomy. A tentative victory, let's imagine in a scenario that Russia emerges out victorious in this crisis. I mean, it may claim it may be a reality or it may be a moral victory, as we say here in India. But it will still give Russia the confidence that it is now able to exert after 30 years. It may also be able to attract partners that are fed up with Belt and Road Initiative.
I see. That's interesting.
So there are many of them in Africa and in Latin America. And in a scenario that Western Russia largely gets immersed in military conflicts, let's say for the next 10, 20 years, Russia would want to bank on the Russian Far East.
Even more, yeah.
Even more. The Russian Far East will become the technology center, the new technology center. And that's where the Chinese and the Russians diverge from each other.
I see. This is interesting. Very interesting scenario. So where does India fit into all this? Are we going to be, we are already a laggard in space. What's going to happen now?
See, the West is not a monolith. Although we have this habit of calling it the West, it's not a monolith. It doesn't think alike. So there is a line of thought that wants India to be penalized for abstaining the votes in the United Nations, in the past few weeks. And then there is a line of thought that is conscientious to the Indian autonomy over its geopolitical positioning. The first line of thought that I just mentioned, it may contemplate some soft sanctions. They may not call it sanctions, but it will be targeted, very surgical, very specific attacks on certain Indian pursuits. And India must prepare for it. Now, India's massive market in the tech sector, in the digital world, is a deterrent for even the United States or Europe or whosoever, even Russia or China. So everybody wants a piece of pie from this cake. But without hampering that aspect, there may be targeted attacks, economic attacks that I'm looking at. And in that case, the most vulnerable domains are, of course, atomic, space, weapons development. So we'll have to be really vigilant on that front. And even if such economic targeting doesn't happen, our space diplomacy will have to now evolve to adjust to the new realities of the multipolar world. A world where India is able to hold on to its pole with the fabled strategic autonomy that we've always spoken about.
Yeah.
Now, we took some fantastic steps during the pandemic. The lull of the lockdown, when everything went quiet, India went back to the drawing board. It carried out the space sector reforms, which otherwise would have been difficult to carry out in normal times, in the normal pre-pandemic times. We were contemplating it for a long time, but we couldn't because you needed that solace. The pandemic offered that solace. And we brought in our private sector, and the government really pushed for an Atmanirbhar Antariksh program. And our space sector will now have to grow to be more tactical in diplomacy and strategic in vision.
So I was looking at So I was looking at this Gaganyaan program. A lot of, I think it's going to launch next year, I presume, I believe.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dependence on the Russians for that. Is that the case?
Yeah, they are training us. So our astronauts are getting trained at the Gagarin Space Flight Center near Moscow. And most of the training has happened. It's in advanced stages. Now they are, some of the astronauts will come back to India, or we are calling them Vyomanauts. We'll have our own name for them. So they'll get trained here around Bangalore, Mysore, in that region. There is a multi-ministerial cooperation in Gaganyaan. So Gaganyaan is not just ISRO's mission. You have a heavy involvement of Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, DRDO, which together constitutes the Ministry of Defense, CSIR, which is constituent of Ministry of Science and Tech, is involved. Then eventually, once the domain of space medicine evolves, our Ministry of Health will come into the picture. And once Gaganyaan is a success, once the first mission, once we prove the first space flight, what happens next is India will have a space station of its own. Not entirely keeping to its own, but we'll have our own partners. And in that scenario, we would want to have partners from both the astropolitical blocks. See, we are the bridging link. So we would continue to use our space program as a thawing mechanism for this increasing rivalry between the two.
You are presuming we can ally with both without coming under, there's going to be require some very fine walking,
Yeah, see, firstly, we'll be at loss if we take sides here. That's for sure. In the long run, we'll be at a loss. In the short run, it might, satiate some of our needs. But in the long run, see, because space is not just civilian, or it's not just commercial. Even in the commercial side, there are dimensions of security. And by taking sides, we would not want to jeopardize what we've believed in, the strategic autonomy. So to upkeep that high doctrine, we'll have to take a middle path. And luckily, I'll tell you what, back in the days when we were, really gung-ho about non-aligned movement.
Yeah.
In those times, the non-aligned partners were all geopolitically non-consequential nations. But there are nations of consequence today, of geopolitical consequence, who do not want to be part of such a bloc, of these two blocs. And the best country that I can think of immediately is France. France doesn't want to be part of either of them.
But they don't have a space program of the kind of, is it as substantial as what we have?
The French? Yeah, they do. They do. See, apart from the Russians, the French are helping us with space medicine for Gaganyaan.
I see. And going forward, you mentioned our own space station. I recall we had done an interview with
We
you
had
some
done it.
time back
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
This space station would follow Gaganyaan. So, I mean, building it together requires a lot of sophistication and technologies and high level of thinking. Are we there yet?
We'll have to get there. This is a train or this is a bus that we can't miss. And what we do in the next 8 years, we've already consumed 2 years of this decade.
Yeah.
So what we do next in next 8 years is what will define our path in outer space. We'll have to derive economic dividends out of it. It's not just investment, investment, and investment.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
have to think of economic returns out of it. We'll have to develop new business models, and that's why the private sector is in now. Because uh, this is where any governmental agency stops thinking.
Yeah.
They can't think profits. They can't think return on investments. Luckily, today even the governments think on those lines. But still, you would need more stakeholders. You will need pooling. You'll need not only national contributions but contributions from friendly nations. Uh, and we would want to partner with friendly nations across the board. So, I mean, you've been saying that we've been lagging. To an extent, yes, we've been lagging. But the thing is, any technology program grows out of ethos and worldview.
Yeah.
Without these two attributes, nobody can build technology effectively. Now, our space program grew during the World War, balancing between these two power blocks, and it is it is for that reason that our space program is not militaristic in nature. It is very pacific. Our
Yeah.
approach is very cost effective because we have grown from underdeveloped economy to now a newly industrialized nation. We are now going to the path of becoming the second largest economy on the planet. And we've always kept socio-economic progress of our own nation and our friendly partners as the ethos. Look at South Asia satellite.
Yeah.
The main thought behind it was providing communications to our friendly neighborhood, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and all, Bangladesh. So we did not lag anywhere. The problem is, it is just that we were prudent and we were believing in a very peaceful future. The space program. Our program worked fine. Uh, we adjusted well to the duopoly of US and Russia. But today, China is rising. Europe is also making its presence felt within the NATO architecture. The Arab world is looking for a progressive future.
Yeah.
The fact that United Arab Emirates just went to Mars is a testimony
Absolutely.
to that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Africa is growing. African countries like Nigeria and South Africa, their space programs are maturing, if not as fast as countries in Asia. And like I said, India is on the way to become the second largest economy. So program is not lacking. It is just that we are now beginning to adjust to the new geopolitical realities. And the faster we adjust, the better it is for us.
And you would say that the private sector in India has to lead this new in this new ecosystem, this new paradigm.
Lead, be proactive partner in areas where government is an equal stakeholder. Like for instance, you mentioned OneWeb.
Yeah.
The Russians are asking the British to give away the stakes in OneWeb. And the second half, the other stake is that of Bharti Global.
I see.
So if Bharti Global is unable to maneuver diplomatically in and around such a situation or scenario, it is the job of the government to come to assistance. See, OneWeb is a competitor to Starlink.
Yeah.
It is a competitor to Elon Musk's Starlink. And if India has a foot in the door, we must make sure that the foot does not come out again. It must stay there, or it must give us entry into that room, into that club. So we'll
And
have to come up with tactical movements.
and you think Russia can force the Brits out of that OneWeb?
No, but if see, OneWeb has been its business model has been weak. And the British government as well as Bharti Global came to its rescue when it was at its abyss.
Okay.
Now, if it still fails to perform at par with Starlink, then of course any investor would want to pull out. So we'll have to make sure that OneWeb sustains, OneWeb grows, and India will have to grow through Bharti Global. So tomorrow, let's say if the Russians say that we won't launch OneWeb satellites, which they've been launching since the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Why not offer
India.
them a GSLV? Why not offer OneWeb to build their satellites here in India?
Yeah.
See, this is how the ecosystem grows. This is how you bring in market forces. And that's why I say we are friendly with the Russians, but we are also in a business with the West.
Yeah.
And the trade numbers that are usually flaunted, a $10 billion, a $100 billion business and trade with. See, that comes into the fore. So on one end, it's a friendship with an old partner, and one end, it's friendships with partners with whom we are wanting to go into the future.
Yeah.
The balancing act will have to come. Yeah, hard decision.
Yeah.
The balancing act will have to come through India. India will have to assert its autonomy. India will have to assert its friendship with Russia to the West. And with Russia, to Russia, it will have to say that, look, we are friends with the West. Sorry. Interest, national interest.
Absolutely. And do you think the government is sensitized to this? Are they, I mean, given your, the work you do for government, do you get a sense that they're aware of these issues?
I'm sure they'll watch StratNewsGlobal.
Okay, Chaitanya, on that note, thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you. Great insight. And going forward, let's hope we get our act together and are able to play this well. Thanks very much again. Great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for all of you out there who've been following this conversation, thank you for your comments and observations. Keep following us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and others. And do keep tracking us on our website too. Goodbye and thank you.